You're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people, they lynched people, they raped people, they enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages? Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. And so don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them. For God's sake, you want to do racist stereotypes? If it fit anywhere, and it doesn't. But if it fit anywhere, it would certainly fit white right-wingers in the South, who has hundreds of years of history of being savages. Savages!
You don't get to enslave people, lynch people, beat people, rape people, eat people, segregate people, lock people out of resources, destabilize families, over-police communities, undereducate schools, poison neighborhoods, and then turn around and have the fucking audacity to say, why are they so angry? What the fuck do you mean, why are they so angry? That question alone is disrespectful as hell, because anger does not come out of nowhere. Intensity does not come out of nowhere. Pain does not come out of nowhere.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the indigenous population out of existence, kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled, and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage? The first time I encountered this was in a little town in Massachusetts called Deerfield. It's a reconstruction of what that little town looked like in colonial America. And in front of each house is a plaque that explains something about this house. And then description. On the 18th of October of 1702, the savages attacked. The first time I saw this, the savages. You come in here, destroy everything these people have, and they are the savages. That's an interesting move.
It is.
You know?
I hadn't thought of that before.
Think about it.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you are doing great wherever you are watching us from. What if some of the most shocking chapter of American history were never taught in school? Right now, millions of people are discovering stories that has sparked outrage, heated debate, and uncomfortable conversation across the country. Some say it's the truth finally coming to light. Others say it's rewriting history. But why is this conversation make so many people nervous? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you might see American history very differently. Anyway guys, let's dive straight into the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share the video to help the channel out. I'll be back with my commentaries.
How come, is there a reason they don't teach us that black people built the pyramids and we had mummies buried in gold? If I'm a savage looking for my next meal, looking for an animal to eat, I'm not worried about burying my ancestors in gold. That's something that only a high-class people got time to even do. We was not looking for our next animal to kill. We was not each other and being savages. We were intelligent, high-vibrational gods.
Middle Passage, white people. Slavery, white people. Jim Crow, white people. Lynchings, white people. Trail of Tears, white people. Wounded Knee, white people. Asian internment camps, white people. The vast majority of gun violence, white people. You see a trend? January 6th, white people. Ahmaud Arbery, 3 white guys.
You have to remember that we learned from some of the best. They had some white boys came over here that did the first beheadings in Point Coupee, Louisiana, where I'm from. Slave insurrection, that was the way you dealt with it. Tuskegee syphilis incident. We're going to see how black men die if they have syphilis, but we pretend we treat them with penicillin, and we're just going to watch the pathology of how they die. Now, that wasn't back 200 years ago. That was 1930 to 1974. We're talking about giving these wonderful blankets to the Native Americans infected with smallpox as they walked on that trail of tears just to see how they die and to eliminate their population so we can take all of that land. So the violence that is in America has come from a very learned position that was brought here by some Caucasian folks. All right?
So
What is white fear? We can take that question in many directions, but I think that there's only one way to explain this. White people are afraid of other races being in power in this country. They don't like anyone that isn't white involved in anything that can systematically change this country, especially when it's systemic change that is in the better interest for everyone, not just white people. White privilege is real. Systemic racism is real, and white ignorance is the driving force of both of those. And many white people don't even know this. Many of them don't even believe in it. What many Latinos, Hispanics, Asian people, and black people will say differently. But Roland Martin broke this down perfectly, and I'm paraphrasing here. First, we have to understand white fear. It is important to understand the insanity and the history behind it also. Without the proper knowledge of this, we will continue to be blindsided every time white fear inevitably rears its head. So let's look back when white fear really got its start. Slavery. The moment slaves were given freedom, the South became furious. January 31st, 1865, slavery was abolished. However, most slaves in those southern states didn't find out until June 19th, 1865, a day also known as Juneteenth. And that's just the beginning. Once black men started being voted into Congress in the South, white people lost their minds even more, especially those down in Mississippi. Dude, once white people started screaming, too many blacks are being voted into Congress, that's gotta stop. White fear started brewing in Mississippi. And guess what? Since 1890, not a single African American has been voted into state office in Mississippi. Since 1890. But wait, there's more. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. White fear embedded its ugly head into the section of the town known as Black Wall Street. Black folks had everything there. It was one of the most prosperous African American communities in the United States. Seeing black people succeed? Well, y'all know that don't fly with white mother. This scared white people so much that they thought black people were gonna start taking over everything and even enslave white people. I wish I was kidding. So you know what those white people did? They burned that whole section down. Burned it down because white fear was flowing through their veins. Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957. Just because this high school was integrating 9 black students into their program, white fear emerged and had white people following them on their way to school, screaming at them, throwing racial slurs at them, spitting at them. I wonder whose grandma this is today, if this is even alive. I would love to hear her opinion on this matter nowadays.
I've been hearing a lot about black fatigue recently, and I want to talk about it, but I can't do it here at home. We gotta go on a trip. So here we are. We are at Plaza Ferdinand VII, and that's a Confederate monument. And you wouldn't know it for looking at it, but this park you see behind me, 2 men were lynched here. Across the street, we have the Pensacola Museum of History. And there's a little sign right over there, remembering votes for women, that somebody spoke here. And despite how beautiful this park looks, calm and serene, 2 men hung from lampposts. Not these ones, because the lampposts have changed since their deaths. There are all kinds of signs and monuments at this park. We have the excavation of a British fort, map of downtown Pensacola, statue dedicated to President Jackson, plaques commemorating a trail, big old cannons pointing to nothing, fun signs on the trash can to remind people to throw away their trash, dance moves, but absolutely nothing commemorating the deaths that happened here. Oh, but Ben, that happened so long ago. Tell that to this guy. His aunt, Lily Davis, was unalived by somebody. And the man that they captured, Leander Shaw, never saw his day in court. Why? Because he was dragged here to this park and hung from one of the lampposts. That woman's niece was also here, even though this happened over 100 years ago. Her niece and nephew were here protesting. What were they protesting? They were protesting that the Equal Justice Initiative was collecting soil from the location of every lynching in the United States, including here in Pensacola. The organizers of that event allowed them to put up a photo of Miss Davis and light a candle in her memory. But despite the fact that Leander Shaw never saw a day of court, they still think he was guilty. We have no idea if he did this or not. So all of you out there complaining about black fatigue, I'm tired of this kind of shit. I'm tired of white people complaining about things that happened in the past. I'm tired of white people blaming black people for things that they didn't do or preventing them getting a day in court. We see it today with Carmelo Anthony. He needs to get his day in court. So many white people, especially on this app, they just want to call him guilty and be done with it. Where just a few decades ago, they'd have had no problem collecting a posse so that afterwards they can celebrate. Whiskey for my men and beer for my horses. I really wish people who look like me could remember the words of a wise woman who once said, you should be happy that black people are looking for equality and not revenge. I hope you all have a good day.
America's first recipe was deep fried Native Americans. Yes, they used to cut Native Americans up into chunks and dip them in hot frying oil. That was the founding of this country. The entire town smelled like burning flesh. Yes, the real founding history of this country is, like I said, cannibalism. This is why they're trying to take this out of schools. They don't teach this in schools. And this is why you need to grab the book, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. They've been trying to ban this book for a reason, you guys. If you see the orange shopping cart down below, this book is still on sale and it's still available.
White people are the only group of people who will label you the aggressor because you refuse to let them disrespect you.
14 years. From 1863 to 1877, look at the progress that black people made attempting to be free, Blacks made great strides achieving political offices, developing private businesses, even setting up dozens of all-black towns. In fact, about it, we had built 60 towns. But white terrorists targeted them for destruction. As in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first bombs that ever fell in America or on American soil fell on Black Wall Street. Y'all remember Black Wall Street in Tulsa?
But white culture is formed in savagery. I also said there isn't a place on God's green earth that they haven't come there and decimated the native inhabitants. There isn't a place. They are murderous savages. That's their culture. They call it conquest. We call it savagery. This is broad history. This is the history of white cultures. When they have the intention to invent a weapon, they don't just invent a weapon that can harm an enemy in one-to-one combat. No. They invent bombs that can decimate entire populations. They invent viruses like smallpox that they spread amongst unvaccinated Native Americans and then decimate their populations. And therefore the Americans, have got a native population which is less than the settler population in certain countries like Argentina. I mean, even a country like Brazil, yes, obviously there are still some native inhabitants there, but their population is less than those who were brought in from Africa as slaves, as well as those who came in as European settlers in the colonial times. So the culture of white people throughout white history, even to this very date, is that of savagery. It's that of inhumane behavior that is normalized to the point where they feel like they're entitled to behave like that.
Whites fear violence from us. We do not have a history of killing white people. White people have a history of killing us. See? And what you fear, may I say this, sir? What you fear, and it's a deep guilt thing, that white folks suffer. You are afraid that if we ever come to power, we will do to you and your fathers what you and your people have done to us. And I think you are judging us by the state of your own mind, and that is not necessarily the mind of black people.
White supremacists be like, we was conquerors and slave owners and shit. No, your ancestors were illiterate cousin fucking farmers. And the people who you claim to be descended from were also cousin fucking savages that reaped havoc across the world for economic gain. And most pathetically of all, here you are in the 21st century espousing the beliefs of racial hierarchy. You're a modern working class person under the delusions of fraudulent 18th century science. That is genuinely so fucking pathetic.
Let's talk about this story out of South Africa because it says everything about hypocrisy and white supremacy. A white farm owner and his workers are on trial for allegedly murdering 2 black women who were unarmed, women who were simply collecting old dairy products. And after they allegedly murdered them, they fed their bodies to pigs. Think about that for a second. They fed their bodies, human beings, to animals. The part that pisses me off the most with this is these are the same kind of people who look at black folks in Africa or America or anywhere else and call us savages. But tell me this, what is more savage than shooting 2 hungry women and then treating their bodies like trash? What's more barbaric than covering it up by feeding their bodies to animals? This isn't just a crime. This is a reflection of a long, ugly history. If you remember, colonizers stole land, they massacred villages, and they called it civilization. Slave masters whipped, raped, and lynched black bodies, and then had church the next morning. Apartheid made people strangers on their own land. And then when we resisted, they called us violent. See the pattern? Whenever black people act out of survival, we're branded as criminals. When white supremacists murder in cold blood, it's protecting property. It's isolated. It's lost in the news cycle somehow. And then you got politicians like Trump who push this lie of a so-called genocide against white farmers while ignoring the everyday violence against black South Africans. That's not just hypocrisy. That's propaganda trying to flip the script and make the oppressor the victim. You want to know the truth? Black people are not savages. What's in our blood is resilience, creativity, and survival against all odds. But what's in their history, their very foundation of white supremacy, is violence, exploitation, and the dehumanization of others. That's the real savagery. So the next time someone dares to point the finger at us, remind them, we didn't invent this cycle of brutality. They did. And we've been surviving it, exposing it, and rising above it for centuries. Now let me ask you this. When are we going to let them stop defining the narrative and start forcing the world to see the truth for what it is?
If you really think about it, white people are such deflectors. You guys literally tried to put the stigma and the notation on us that we're the aggressors, we're just violent, and I don't know, like we're just ready to kill everything we see, when it was y'all. Only in your history are you guys the savages. None in our history does it say that we created or started genocides or we removed cultures from their country and took them to a whole different nation against their will, enslaved. I don't think black people was killing others because they were Jews. I don't think black people removed Native Americans from their land. I don't know. This is just history that I'm talking about. It's just like, please live comfortably in y'all skin, which y'all already do. But please just stop trying to put that persona on us, that we're just these negative people that's just ready to be violent, when it's really you guys. In every era, in every generation, you guys choose violence. It doesn't matter. In every scenario. In every scenario. I have nothing against whites, but I am all for black, if that makes sense. Take that what you will.
White People and Cannibalism Part 4. So, as you guys know, we've been on this journey together, learning about how white people just were munching on people for like the longest time ever, apparently. So we've already talked about medical cannibalism with the mummies, just as a brief recap, and that's why the mummies are so rare. And we're talking about cannibalism during and after slavery now. So, basically, the word picnic, which is now just really disgusting to me, and I'm never going to use it again, really. It comes from pick a N-word, and basically what they would do is they would throw these like barbecue parties where everyone would gather outside, sort of like that one famous painting of everyone in the park, if any of my artists out there know what I'm talking about. And there would be like a lineup of people. They would pick one out. They would do a public lynching, and then after they'd publicly lynch the individual, they would barbecue them, and like everyone would take a little piece to eat for some reason.
When we look around and we see today in our politics a rich white man telling working class white people that their problem is brown people, we need to understand the historical pedigree of that. That is symbolic of the entire history of race and class politics in America. The history of rich white people telling working class and poor white people that their problem are black and brown people. Beginning in the 1600s, that is what happens. Prior to about 1670 or so, there was no such thing as the white race, at least not recognized as such, called as such. That is not what people of European descent were when they were in Europe. They were English, they were Irish, they were Scottish, they were whatever they were. They were not white. Only in the colonies do we become white, and for a very specific reason, because in those early years of the colonial period, where you had white indentured servants, one level above enslaved themselves, and you had African-descended folks, some of them enslaved for life, others indentured servants also in the earliest years of the colonies, those people would often see their interests as being common. They all realized that they were being screwed over by the same landowners, the same elite. They fomented various rebellions, like Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia, others as well. And as a result, the elite in the colonies realized that they had to figure out a way to get the other folks from Europe on their team. So they created this mentality that said, you're now a member of the white race. You're on our team. You're wearing our uniform. Now you're at the end of the bench. You may not get in the game, but you're on our team, you see. So then they start putting white folks, now called, on the slave patrols, right? Didn't really give them any land or any real power except the power to control people of color, which is why folks of color say, and they are right, that modern policing traces to the system of slave patrols and slavery. And we have to be clear on that because that's the history. Right? Whiteness was created to divide and conquer, to create the notion that even though you might not have much, at least you're not black, at least you're not indigenous, at least you're not Mexican, at least you're not Chinese working on the railroads to build the transcontinental economy. You may not have much, but at least you have, as W.E.B. Du Bois said, the psychological wage of whiteness. And it's a trick that was played during the Civil War era on my people in the South, right? Rich folk, landowners in the South telling poor white folks who didn't own anything that they got to go out and fight to preserve the rich man's property in human beings. Fascinating. Why would you do that? Why would I go fight for your property? Well, because you told me that if I don't, these slaves are going to take my job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. If you got to charge $1 a day and you can make them work for free because you own them, guess who got the gig, Jack? Not you. When in fact, the system of enslavement was in the long run against the class interest of working class white folks, but they got suckered. Same thing happened in the union movement. You had white labor union folks who didn't want black and brown bodies in their union because it would reduce the professionalism of the craft. No, fool, it'll double the size of your union. And then when you go out on strike, they can't replace your happy ass with the brown folk that you didn't want next to you in the first place. Because when they do replace you with them, then you will blame them, not the elite. See how that works? It's a trick. And it has worked for hundreds of years. It is working on some folk right now. And it is our job to resist that with every fiber.
We talk about how ironic it is that the right demonizes people of color when the only time I feared for my life has been around a white man. I get so many hate comments like these few here. Most of the time I just write it off as immature, angry men, but the times that I've genuinely been scared that violence was going to be inflicted upon me have been white men. Not to mention that a lot of domestic violence as well as many mass shootings are committed by white men. There are going to be people in any demographic that commit crimes, but the fact that the right focuses so intensely on the single crime that a person of color commits is so dishonest. Some of the craziest things that have happened to me since I started posting is that I've gotten my account banned because white supremacists mass reported me for being underage, which I'm clearly not. They found my phone number and leaked it, so I had to change my phone number. They tried to get me fired by contacting any school in Chicago to see if I worked there. There was even an online page to see who was calling which school. I've literally been called a race traitor and told that I will be lynched along with POC. So no, people of color aren't the problem here. It is white men, and that's why I make the content I do. They prove it to me more and more every single day why it's necessary.
Welcome back, guys. One of the arguments coming from the progressive and left-leaning historians is simple. You can't solve problems you refuse to acknowledge. For decades, many Americans learned a version of history that focused heavily on national achievement while spending far less time discussing slavery, racial violence, segregation, voter suppression, and treatment of indigenous communities. That doesn't mean America has no achievement. It means the full story includes triumphs and tragedies. And that's where the current debate begins. Across social medias, younger generations are discovering historical events that many people never learned much in school. Events like the destruction of prosperous black communities, violent racial massacres, discriminatory laws, and government policies that created unequal opportunities for generations. For many viewers, learning these stories feels shocking, not because the events themselves are new, but because they were never discussed with the same intensity as other parts of American history. The left-wing perspective argues that understanding this history isn't about creating guilt, it's about creating awareness. The goal isn't revenge. The goal is accountability and improvement. Because if systemic inequalities were built over centuries, then pretending those centuries never happened won't make the consequences disappear. Another major point raised in these discussions is the idea that race has often been used as political tools. Many progressive scholars argue that political elites historically benefited when working class people were divided against each other instead of uniting around economic issues. The argument is that the people focus on racial conflict, they become less likely to challenge concentration of wealth and power. Whether people agree with this analysis or not, it remains one of the most influential ideas within modern left-wing policies, and is where conversation about race often overlap with conversation about wages, healthcare, education, housing, and economic equalities. But here is where the controversy really heats up. Critics often accuse this discussion of being anti-American. Supporters respond that criticizing a nation's failure isn't hatred, it's patriotism. They argue that real patriotism means wanting your country to live up to its highest ideals, not pretending its mistake never happened. From this viewpoint, teaching difficult history isn't an attack on America, it's an attempt to build a more honest version of it. And that honesty can be uncomfortable. Nobody likes discovering that historical figures they admired may have also participated in harmful systems. Nobody enjoys realizing that some nation myths are more complicated than they first appeared. But history is really simple. Heroes can do terrible things. Victims can also show incredible resilience. Entire nation can represent both freedom and injustice at the same time. At the end of the day, the question isn't whether history should make us uncomfortable. The question is whether it should make us informed, because understanding the past isn't about changing what happened. It's about understanding how yesterday continues to shape today. Anyway guys, what do you think about this video? Drop your thoughts in the comment section and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share the video to help the channel out. See you in my next video. For now, peace.